This is my heater. I dare you to hit it.
He'll be sorry.
Want the heater? I'll give it to you.
Basketball, maybe they don't hit it.
A swing and a drive to deep right.
Clear the deck. Cannonball coming.
Left field. It is out of here.
What up? What's good, Baseball Unstitched? We are back. A little bit of a new background for me is I'm going to be at my dad's for a little bit, but we got a good show for you guys today. As always, there's a couple high-end names that people have been talking about getting moved during the winter meetings, but we're not talking about those guys who you're expecting to contribute at the major league level. We're talking about the prospects that people have been talking about. One big name out there, Bryce Eldridge, has been talked about as a potential guy who will be moved. If you're not familiar with the 6'7" giant, today you will get familiar with him. Jackson Bullpen, 6'7"? You're right. Jackson's Bullpen is coming to you again. Once again, if you don't remember what Jackson's Bullpen is, that is Jackson Scudder's new segment with us here on Baseball Unstitched, where he brings up a topic. We don't know what it is, but he's going to teach us something and you something. And then finally, we are going to dig into the Kansas City Royals and their search for not one, but two outfield bats and potentially an ad Flaxen I believe they need, which would be a utility man to round out their roster. But as always, we start where we start. Flax, how was the weekend?
Weekend was good. I rode in the car with you for 24 hours, getting you back to Maryland, to your dad's house, you and the dog. All in all, pretty good weekend. It's a pretty smooth trip for us. Didn't really run into much. No real weather troubles. Spent the night in a hotel, and then I flew back Sunday back to Colorado, sitting in my usual seat. But yeah, otherwise pretty good.
Yeah, somehow not sick of each other yet. Still doing a podcast, so hopefully you guys are happy about that part. Flax, what happened this week in baseball?
There were a lot of moves that happened this week, and I will say this week, covering down on the last kind of week and a half, because our episode last week, not much was going on, but Drew Anderson to the Tigers on what we call a 1+1 deal, 1 year guaranteed, the next year an option, his being a club option. First year is $7 million, second year is $10 million. Ryan Helsley to the Orioles, a 1+1 deal, $14 million first year, $14 million player option on the second year. Devin Williams to the Mets, 3 years, $51 million when it's all said and done, $36 million base broken out, $12 million a year, $15 million deferred, 5 per year. That $15 million is paid out over 10 years at $1.5 million per year annually from 2036 to 2045. So the Mets have their new Bobby Bonilla. Alek Manoah, for those who remember him as a Blue Jay and at some point in time a Brave, I believe, has really been through a lot of injury struggles. But he signed a 1 year guaranteed $1.95 million deal with the Angels for the upcoming 2026 season. I'm sure he's excited to get into spring training and actually know where he's going and what he's doing. Ryan Weiss signed with the Astros to a 1+1 deal. This was one of the more interesting deals that happened, I think, over the last week and a half. First year's $2.6 million. There's a club option for potentially up to about $10 million. But I think it's interesting because in digging on him, we found out he only ever made it up to AAA. Pitched to a 6+ ERA in 70+ games, and then had a short stint in the Chinese League. Did really well there, netted him an opportunity in the KBO, the Korean Baseball League. And then in 30 starts this past year, went 16-5 with a 2.87 ERA in 178.2 innings pitched. And now he's getting a shot at the big league level. So that's always fun. Cody Ponce, again, a guy who came out of Asia after not being successful in the MLB and is now making three years, $30 million with the Blue Jays. Stuff was absolutely gross this past year. Anthony Kay to the White Sox, 2 years, $12 million. Really good left-handed bullpen help for the White Sox. I think in general, we're going to see a lot of these moves from the White Sox where they feel small, but you'll start to hear these guys' names over and over again as the season goes on, because there's something that the team that's trying to be a little bit more analytically focused and data-minded is finding fits in what they're trying to do and fits with the structure of the guys that they have. Miguel Rojas, many of you might remember him as one of the heroes for the Dodgers in Game 7 of the World Series, signed for a 1-year, $5.5 million deal with the intent to move into an office role in 2027 afterwards and retire. I think that's pretty cool. I think that that's probably a little bit more than he was worth in terms of dollars and the impact he's going to have, but a nice little thank you bonus for the work he did winning another World Series. The Red Sox and Pirates had a pretty big trade. Top 100 prospect Justinson Garcia, who many of you know as the Password, and right-handed pitcher Jesus Travieso are going to the Pirates for right-handed pitcher and starter Johan Oviedo. Left-handed pitcher Tyler Samaniego and catcher Adonis Guzman, they're headed to the Red Sox. And then another big trade happened while we were on the drive. The Nationals and Mariners traded with each other. Left-handed pitcher Jose Ferrer chewed up about 75-ish innings out of the bullpen for the Nationals, has really, really good stuff. Headed to the Mariners where they lack left-handed arms. And then catcher Harry Ford, who's right now blocked by Cal Raleigh, is headed to Washington, D.C., not the state, which is fun. And right-handed pitching prospect Isaac Lyon is headed to the Nationals. I think we looked it up. I think Isaac Lyon was just recently drafted in 2025. So a nice upside play. Certainly some numbers there that Taboni and team seem to like and expect to be something they can work with and grow with a lot of the new technology they're investing in to help guys develop themselves in the in-season, off-season. This morning, Mike Soroka, who was with the Nationals and then traded to the Cubs last season and has battled from injury, signed a 1-year deal with the Diamondbacks, $7.5 million, about $2 million in incentives are out there that could push it to 9.5. I haven't seen the incentives, but considering the last 4 years, I would guess it's somewhere around either innings pitched or starts made. I'd like to see him meet those because it means we get to see a full season of Mike Soroka, and he deserves it. The stuff is still very good. He picked up some new pitches the last couple of years that have helped him fall back into this realm of being able to excel both as a reliever and as a starter. And then lastly, big news on December 7th, the Baseball Hall of Fame has elected Jeff Kent off of the contemporary ballot, one of the best, if not the best, offensive second baseman in the history of baseball. One of only 8 players off of the contemporary ballot that was elected to be inducted in next year's Hall of Fame class. I think if nothing else comes of this contemporary ballot, this elevates Chase Utley's chances of at some point getting into the Hall of Fame tremendously.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think this is a scenario where, frankly, I was just disappointed with the results. Not because Jeff Kent didn't deserve it, because he absolutely does and is a Hall of Famer in my opinion, but a little disappointed with all the other names that were on this ballot. Guys who didn't get enough votes to even be reported.
It's
hard.
so hard because you need 10 of 12. You have 12 guys on the committee. You need 10 of those 12 guys to use their votes on these guys, and they only get a certain number of votes. So it's not like everyone can just vote for everyone. So you have to dole them out how you want. And there's very clear bias against guys who were in a PED era. Not an illegal PED era, a pre-2005 legal PED era that was mainly driven by a guy who is in the Hall of Fame. I'm almost positive he's not alive anymore. Bud Selig passed away, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, R.I.P. Bud Selig. But Bud Selig being in the Hall of Fame, not speaking ill on his name, but was very much a proponent and a reason why steroids lasted as long as they did in the game, made a lot of his notoriety off of the game in that moment in time as a commissioner. And the guys that helped him get there are continuously being blackballed out of the highest honor that the game can bestow upon its best players.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, for me, it's a time frame thing, right? I think there was an era where at the end of the day, they weren't illegal yet. Whether it was right or wrong to be doing them is a whole different story. But we call it the steroid era for a reason. We have the dead ball era, right? This is not a new thing. Baseball has had eras throughout time. And I just think that leaving out some of the best players ever who were part of an era of which, again, it just wasn't illegal at the time. Right or wrong doesn't factor into that situation at that point because technically speaking, it was not wrong at the time. But a week ago, me and you.
I was going to say, that's not today's conversation.
That is not today's conversation.
Now that we are through this week in baseball.
Long one this week. Let's move into talking about one of our favorite front offices in all of baseball over the last calendar year, and that would be a Buster Posey run San Francisco Giants organization. It came out earlier this week that the Giants may be willing to move their number one prospect in their farm system, Bryce Eldridge, former 2023 first-round pick. This is a 21-year-old who is 6'7", 200-plus pounds, and hits absolute tanks. Right? We're talking about a guy who last year, 260, 510 slug, 25 home runs. He K'd at a 29% rate to a 10% walk rate, a 364 WOBA, a 119 WRC+. Guy is exactly what you expect corner pop to be. And again, he'll be playing next year at 22 years old. Already had big league at bats. I mean, this is one heck of a prospect here, Flax.
It's a guy that Buster Posey himself speaks very highly of. He was asked today at the winter meetings, or at the winter meetings, he was asked, what the likelihood is he gets moved. And, he said, we listen on everyone. You and I talk about this all the time. Everyone on your roster is always available. You just may not like the price I'm going to put in front of you or ask for, because sometimes I think a guy's got a higher value than you want to believe. But they're going to listen on him. But in his mind at this moment, he sees Eldridge and Devers splitting time at first base. Chapman will play third base. And he believes that Eldridge has the power and the swing to be an impactful bat in this league for the next 10 to 15 years. When your GM is speaking on you that way, he believes that you hold value. And so when you start looking at what this guy probably needs to improve to consistently be where a guy like Posey thinks he needs to be, those are things that he believes that organization can improve and can impact, right? You mentioned a 29% K rate. We would love to see that come down. It's a really high K rate. But I'll tell you what, there are guys in this league with 29% K rates that put out 40-plus bombs, and we're all right with them having a 29% K rate. There's also guys in this league that have a 29% K rate and a 5% walk. A 10% walk rate is very high in this league. So he's getting himself on base. He's impactful to his team at the plate. And he plays a really solid first base. That's a big old target over there. Reminds me a lot of a guy that we saw the Giants bring up and that I wish was still in the league in Brandon Belt. It's a very, very similar figure. Very tall. A lot of very easy pop. A little bit of swing and miss. But when he gets right, boy, does he get right, and the ball jumps off his bat.
Absolutely, and those numbers that I gave out, they were his numbers between AA and AAA this year, if I did not mention that. Look, we're talking about a guy who slugged .512 last year between those two leagues. .512 actually at the AAA level. James Wood, another 6'7", absolute tree of a human who hits left-handed, young kid, .532 slug at the AAA level, right? I mean, we're talking about two guys who have similar upsides, but just like we saw with James Wood, it's going to take time to adjust to the major league level. No question, regardless of who you are. But Wood with 31 bombs last year for the Nats shows that a lot of times when you have raw power like this, it's going to shine through. The batted ball metrics that Bryce Eldridge showed at the minor league level last year were fantastic. When this guy hits the ball, he hits the ball hard. In most of the metrics you'd like to see guys good in, or as people love to refer to, as you'd like to see in red on the Savant page, Bryce Eldridge is red on those spots on the Savant page. Really excited to see what happens. let's continue to move towards the question here, which is, why would you move him, right? And I think the answer is pretty simple. The Giants and Posey do believe they're in more of a window. I understand that 2025 didn't go the way they wanted to, but at the end of the day, if you look at what they have, bringing in a high-end starting pitcher with a little bit of controllability to a lot of controllability, however you really want to utilize that statement, would be extremely impactful at the top of that rotation for the guys that they currently have. I think it's something that they could probably go out and find and buy with Eldridge if they really wanted to. Again, regardless of how Posey talks about Eldridge, it wasn't Posey's 1-1 pick, so it's not as if his name is technically speaking stamped on the player. First base and DH are historically two spots that you're buying the bat, not the defense. I do think Posey feels like he's in a really good position here because they have Devers. They have a pretty set and stacked outfield with Jung-Hoo Lee, with Elliot Ramos, with Gerard Encarnacion. Like this group is very good. I know I just missed a name too, but we'll go back around to that here in a moment, I'm sure. At the end of the day, what we're getting at is there's surplus in Posey's mind here. When you're in a window and there's surplus, you take that and you turn it into something that you have to have. Adding to a guy like Logan Webb at the top of the rotation via a move with Eldridge could be huge for them.
Yeah, when I look at their roster construction and I look at some of the pieces that could still get them over the hump more consistently, I think he is the most easily movable piece. That's why you move him. Right? When you're in a situation where you're really only needing a couple of things, but you also want to bolster a pipeline, a guy who really hasn't faltered much up the line, but you have people that play in the position that he plays in and can do it every single day, why are you splitting their at-bats? Why not leverage his talent and his upside to go somewhere? When you look at underlying numbers for a guy like Bryce Eldridge, they're not far off from a guy like Aaron Judge. I'll tell you what a guy like Aaron Judge does very differently from a guy like Bryce Eldridge, because it really isn't the swing and miss. It's the decision to swing when the opportunity comes. A guy like Aaron Judge is swinging 80% of the time when it's in a hittable zone. A guy like Bryce Eldridge is swinging 68% of the time. So if you're going to take 10, 11% of the opportunities that are afforded to you to do damage, and you're choosing to not swing the bat to do damage, then you're not that same aggressor. But if you're making the same level of contact when the ball is in the zone, if you're making that same quality of contact when you are taking your swing and putting it in play, you have the ability to do that level of damage, finding the realities of, hey, guys are going to put the ball over the middle of the plate to me, whether it's a fastball, a breaking ball, whatever. I have the ability to hit all of them, which, by the way, Bryce Eldridge did not hit the fastball great in his short time in the big leagues, but has the ability to hit a fastball. If we can get him there, which a lot of teams feel like that's a pretty easy thing to fix, then, especially with a guy of his caliber and talent, then you're going to have a lot of people calling and asking. And the benefit of a lot of people calling and asking means it becomes a seller's market, and Posey can get a whole lot in return for him. So when you start to look at this upside, the reason to move him doesn't necessarily fall on, whether or not Posey thinks that he's going to help him down the road, but whether or not he's going to create pieces that are going to help him down the road when they've already filled the spots this guy's going to take at-bats in. And you just traded for Rafi Devers, who's taking those at-bats. You're not going to be able to flip that contract at the cost that it is. Even though Boston's eating some of the money, you're not going to be able to flip that contract the way that Boston did, because you don't have the same reason Boston did to get rid of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I think at the end of the day, people, let's remember that you're not going to be able to shift Devers over to third base. You're already paying Chapman a whole lot of money. So it's not as if it's an easy slot in. No, nor should you. You're correct. Chapman is an extremely good defensive third baseman. I do not think San Francisco wants to lose that. And again, with how stacked they are right now in the outfield, I just don't expect a move in the outfield. I think they're going to have to utilize one of those spots as a DH or a rotational piece, with Devers being at DH from time to time. So,
but I'll also say this, right? And plenty of teams in the league have
Drew
dealt
Gilbert.
with this.
Why couldn't I spit out the name earlier?
I don't know.
He's in that outfield as well.
you said it with regards to the lineup, so he was in your brain. I I will say this. When you start to think about Bryce Eldridge and what he can bring to the table from a depth perspective, a lot of teams dealt with injuries this past year. A lot of teams are going to continue to deal with injuries, especially teams like the Giants where their players continue to get older and older. There is a world in which whatever Posey gets back for Eldridge needs to be so much and probably more pipeline based than major league talent based that he can go sign major league ready depth.
It's either going to be that or it's going to be coming to a team like mine and grabbing two guys that are at the major league level who can make an impact immediately in a Gore and a Abrams, right? That would be the type of top-end MLB talent plus minor league talent to potentially match.
And Casey Schmidt
the Nats are going to take guys lower.
Casey Schmidt could be depth as a second baseman.
He's already proven it. Casey Schmidt can play all over the diamond. So I think there's worlds where this happens, but I do agree with you that the cost is going to be a lot steeper than I think most people are assuming it is right now, right?
Absolutely.
So let's blast through a couple other guys here who we're expecting to potentially be moved for more major league talent, as we do have a ton of teams that are in the window right now, as we like to say. One of those teams is the New York Mets. We've heard Jett Williams' name floated around left and right. This is a guy who in AA and AAA last year was extremely solid. 261, 363, a 465 slug, 17 home runs, 34 doubles, 34 stolen bases, a 375 WOBA, and a 136 WRC plus. Kid is an absolute athlete, a guy they took out of high school, has had some injury issues throughout his time coming up through the major leagues. However, great profile on this kid from an athleticism perspective, and then a bat-to-ball skill. He has a really solid barrel rate. Combo that with his pull air rate and his ability to swing at strikes in the zone. I think you've got a guy that a lot of R&D departments are looking at and kind of salivating over when you really add then the speed grade that he gets in the background and flax. Jett Williams does something you love. He hammers the fastball.
Yes, he does.
I mean, this kid, seeing 26.4% fastballs, had an XWOBA of 477 on fastballs at the AAA level last year, slugged 686 against them. I really like what Williams brings to the table. His biggest detractor, can he stay on the dirt, as our good friend Ryan Dorsey would say? I do think he very well could just be a high-end center fielder, but would like to get your thoughts on Williams.
I personally think he's probably the right piece to move in one of these deals that the Mets end up doing to get some frontline starting pitching. And the reason I say that is just because he's versatile. He's shown in the last year that when he's on the diamond, he can be a really high-level player. And I think some teams like the Pirates, who have a guy like a Mitch Keller, who could be a beneficial starting pitcher for the Mets, would love a guy like a Jett Williams who's super athletic and fits into some of the model that they're trying to create with some of the other guys that they have coming through the system. Again, he's not going to take Connor Griffin's spot at shortstop. He's going to work in plenty of other places around the diamond. Honestly, if he plays center field, I'd love to get O'Neal Cruz into right field. I think that would be a really great move for both sides. But Jett Williams, like you said, isn't always available, which can detract from what he's worth. So if you're the Mets, maybe you hang on to him for another year, see where he can impact you, maybe get another full year of baseball under his belt and see his value go up. Right now, the Mets don't necessarily need him to fit into the outfield. Carson Bench is probably going to get that opportunity in spring training, especially with Nimmo being moved. I know there's other options out there for that team to pair with Soto. It's for what Jett Williams brings to the table, there's a lot to like. But I will say, he definitely doesn't profile as, your future superstar. He profiles to me much more as your future, 6 to 8 years with one ball club, being very right above average. You know what he's bringing to the ballpark every day. I'd like to see him leave the injury issues behind him and just be a guy who is going to be on the field 150 plus days every year. And you get some level of excitable, move around the diamond, versatile talent for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, listen, at the end of the day, I do believe that the ceiling is extremely high for this kid, but I also think he's a high floor guy, which is one of the things that's going to be very attractive to a lot of teams. I think at worst, Jett Williams is an excellent utility man, kind of, in my opinion, where you may be going with that statement throughout the next X amount of length of his career. I think him being at least a Zach McKinstry type player, again, that being possibly the floor, is a very, high potential. And frankly, whether people want to admit it or not, that's a very, very solid baseball player at the major league level with a very long career trajectory.
This is the honest conversation, right? Is people need to have an understanding that there's 30 teams. Every team has a top 30, top 100 prospect list. Just because the guy is in the top 5 as a pitcher doesn't mean he's a frontline starter. Just because he's in the top 5 as a position player doesn't mean he's a superstar. It means that he has the ceiling of being a perennial all-star, but he also has the floor to be a 10-year big leaguer if people keep giving him contracts, and he's going to play a 100 to 110 WRC plus and a 1.5 WAR across the diamond, especially for a utility man like a Jett Williams.
Totally agree. Biggest reasons, again, why we think that Jett Williams is going to be the one who we end up moving is pretty simple. The Mets are in need of starting pitching. They're going to have to find it somewhere, and we know they're going to be aggressive looking for starting pitchers. Secondly, shortstop is occupied for the New York Mets. Not sure if you've heard of a guy named Francisco Lindor, but I have a weird feeling he's not going anywhere. And then, of course, the other two positions that you'd expect a guy like Jett Williams to play, center field or second base, are two strong points throughout the Mets system at the current moment, making Jett Williams surplus, as we like to say. A couple names, if you're not familiar: Carson Benj, who is expected to get a shot to be the Mets center fielder this year, Jacob Reamer, A.J. Ewing, Mitch Voigt. So, Mitch Voigt was their first-round pick out of Michigan this year, right? So there is a lot of depth currently where Jett Williams plays. Excited to see what happens here. Flax, who is next on our list?
Next on our list, Carlos Lagrange. What a great name. I mean, it's a top-tier baseball name, but 2025 stats in high A and double A, 120 innings pitched, a 3.53 ERA, a 3.14 FIP, a 3.21 xFIP, 12.6 Ks per nine, which is gaudy, and a 4.65 walk per nine, 0.6 home runs per nine. The dude keeps the ball in the park, generally, is playing some Louisiana baseball, as we like to call it. He's throwing the ball by you. Four-seam fastball touches the upper 90s, has gotten it up to 102 with some ride run, has a very sweepy slider. That's where a lot of his swing and miss comes. He's got a really solid curveball. I think he's kind of shifted that off of the slider, a little bit of grip change. Ryan, I know you did a little bit deeper digging. And then changeup works well off the 102 with ride run because it has some good depth and run on it itself with a very similar shape.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Lagrange has got everything that you would want to see in that number one type ceiling with as hard as he throws, right? 4.65 walks per nine. It's obvious where, he needs to improve. We're talking about another guy who has a massive frame here. When you're on the hill and you've got that type of frame, it is rare that you have the ability to consistently control your body at the level it needs to be controlled to throw strikes regularly. This guy has shown some propensity to do that, but the biggest thing is his feel for his spin at the end of the day. I think the cutter did really help him this year from a results perspective, but as he learns to keep that more in the zone, or as the Yankees or whatever organization he is part of potentially by the end of this offseason hope, is that he's able to do that. I think the big thing here for the Yankees is no reason not to go get another piece to help your team, and Lagrange being healthy for the first time over the 4 years he's been in this organization allowed him to show off a little bit, and I think his stock is really high. The Yankees have a ton of depth at starting pitching throughout their minor league system, and in their top 10 prospects by MLB.com, 5 of their top 10 are starters, and 4 of those top 10 have thrown innings at AA or higher in 2025. So, when you look at all that depth they have at their minor league level with starting pitching that is quite effective, I would suspect that if they were gonna move a piece to go make themselves better, Lagrange would make a ton of sense. And again, we talk about being in a window. As good as Lagrange is, when you're trying to win a World Series, MLB experience and potentially postseason experience is going to consistently win over having a rookie who you are not sure what you're going to get on the hill. So I think it would make a lot of sense for this to be one of the guys the Yankees look to move when this is all said and done.
Well, and here's what I'll say. Up until about early middle of June this past year, his walks were actually really good. If you look through his game logs, and when you break that down across his career at this level, you're talking about the point at which he threw almost double the amount of innings he had ever thrown in a singular big league season, whether we're talking about his 2 years in rookie ball or across two different levels of the minors in 2024. And so when you start to think about what he was processing, I have a feeling he got through a good amount of starts. I think that probably got him through anywhere around 10 to 12 starts into the middle of June. You probably dealt with a guy who was a little tired, fell back into some older mechanics, and was trying to kind of grind his way through getting outs. But you know what? That's a part of the learning process. Because when you get to the big leagues and you pitch 170 innings, you are going to have periods of time in the middle of the season, towards the end of the season, where you learn how to grind with not your best stuff. You learn how to be more confident with not your best stuff over the middle of the plate. He's slowly getting there. We're talking about a guy who in 2024, in 21 innings, walked 20 guys. In 120 innings last year, he walked 62. It's not great, but it is a certain improvement from the 2 years prior of what he was doing against the innings pitch that he was throwing. So you can see there is a clear upside path for a guy who's 22 and 6'7", 250 pounds. He pitched in the spring breakout last year for the Yankees, and as soon as he stepped on the mound, there was a presence. New York loves guys like this. If he can embrace that and get his way all the way to the Bronx, I think you're looking at a guy who could very easily be a high front end guy for them. I also think you could be looking at their next Dylan Betances. If he's topping out at 102, has a sweepy slider and an okay changeup, this guy could easily be closing ball games for them by the middle of 2027.
Yeah, the floor here on this guy is a high leverage reliever, just pending health right at the end of the day.
And
a couple
strikes.
ideas too, if the Yankees do decide that they want to make a move to improve them. Biggest spot that we looked at, even with the loss of Bellinger, especially with Trent Grisham coming back, and Jason Dominguez hopefully finally getting a full-time job in that outfield. And
he also is only 22.
Correct. Would probably be that third base spot here. Ryan McMahon, who they do have one more season, who they got from Colorado at the deadline, is an excellent defender. However, his offense has left a little bit to be desired for the Yankees. A guy like Alec Boehm, who we know the Phillies have been shopping for a hot second, who has been a very good bat at third base, whether anybody wants to admit it or not. Maikel Garcia had a great season for Kansas City. They talked about moving him last offseason prior to this really good year that he had, so who knows if he's actually still available. And then I know when you're talking about your number 2 prospect, your goal is not to go for a flyer, but there's a couple guys to be talked about, and one of the most fun ones to talk about is Royce Lewis. The only issue with Royce Lewis is he can't stay on the field. However, if for some reason the Yankees could find the magic pill, he would hit 40 home runs in that stadium. No problem whatsoever as a right-handed bat. I would love to see something like that. Give him an opportunity to get new scenery. See if the Bronx can keep him healthy, which is a crazy statement potentially. But hey, you never know.
You know what they're known for.
Yeah, you never know.
You know what my hard part is with Royce Lewis, and it's definitely not something to belabor on this point of, but when it comes to his injuries, they scream lingering injuries. They're not like fluke problems, right? We're talking about legs that just can never be fresh. Hamstrings, quads, abdominals, obliques, knees, like a knee injury that basically has progressed into muscles surrounding and propelling that area, like never fully being healthy. And I don't know how you get back to that point if you're him, But boy, if we could get a full season of that guy, how lucky would we be?
What's crazy is that he could probably give you a 750 OPS if you just told him to walk to first base and not play defense. That's how, but I'm just trying to make a point of how good the bat is, right?
Yes.
I want that to be like, that is meant to be a compliment in every way, shape, or form.
I agree.
But before we go too far into Royce Lewis, Flax, you get one more here. Tell us a little bit about an Oriole that might get moved.
Yeah, I don't like talking about it that way, but it's definitely, if there's a piece that's going to move from the outfield that has shown value and would be a movable piece that would garner excitement, it would be Dylan Beavers, right? In AAA, hit 304, 420, 515, 18 home runs, 23 stolen bases, at an 18% K rate, but a 16% walk rate, which is egregious, by the way. That is an absurdly high walk rate. And he got to the big leagues and did the exact same thing. He was basically walking once a game. A 415 WOBA and a 152 WRC+. He plays a very solid outfield. The Orioles had him in left field, which he struggled with. Very much more a right fielder. If you watch his swing, you watch his presence in the box, it very much reminds me a lot of Kyle Tucker. It just seems very calm, comfortable. You're not going to beat him with heat on the inside. He's got quick hands, short swing. Even left on left, he was able to find some success doing that this past year. The reason that he is probably a candidate to get moved is because the outfield is crowded. Cowser has been there a little longer, hasn't nearly progressed to what you'd like him to be, but has shown flashes of how great he can be, but his floor feels really low. So the likelihood that someone takes him on is lower. Then when you start thinking about what the Orioles need when it comes to pitching, some guys that would be worthy to go after, like a Joe Ryan, and you start thinking about what other teams like that would be looking for, it would probably be filling some gaps in the outfield that are now missing after the trade deadline last year and people falling to free agency this past year that were more versatile, depthy players across the board. The outfield right now is Colton Cowser, Tyler O'Neill, Taylor Ward, and Dylan Beavers. Enrique Bradfield Jr. is going to get his chance in spring training to try and make the club and break camp. More than likely, he'll go back to AAA because that's how Mike Elias rolls. But there's a lot of surplus in that area. And we don't like to use the words logjam because with a team who had 29 injuries last year, you quite literally cannot have enough talent. It is absolutely a surplus. But that surplus means when you need to fill bigger gaps and you have folks waiting in the wings, like an Enrique Bradfield Jr., which is a left-handed bat with good outfield defense, which is the same thing that Dylan Beavers is, high walk rate, good OBP, you do have the opportunity to move the guy who has actually shown at the big league level that he can be successful.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton to be said from me, right? Like, that is exactly the situation. I think at the end of the day here with Beavers, you're just looking at a guy who has proven he can do it through 35 games. He was solid for Baltimore, right? The swing was great for what it's worth, right? My joke to you was the swing comp ceiling is Kyle Tucker. The swing comp floor was James Outman. Turns out both of those guys have had some solid time at the big league level, and Outman's going to get a chance, I think, to show people how good he actually is. I think people have kind of forgotten, and it's kind of what happens when you're part of the Dodgers organization because they have a million guys who are really good. So when he has a really solid season, hits 20-plus home runs again next year with the Minnesota Twins, I think this comp will probably resonate a little bit better with people. But for now, we'll leave it where it is. At the end of the day, you want to go get a guy like Joe Ryan. Let's say the offseason, and I told you this earlier, is going exactly the way you wanted it to, right? You go in and you grab a Pete Alonso, a Kyle Schwarber. You go in on the free agent market and you grab a Ranger Suarez or a Framber Valdez. Now is the time.
You nailed it.
Now is the time then, at that point when your offseason is going according to plan, to push the chips into the middle of the table. And it's when you move a guy like Beavers to get Joe Ryan, to get Pablo Lopez. Sanchez, or Lopez. Jeez, see, Pablo Sanchez, we play in backyard baseball.
Tell you what, if
now.
they want to go get Pablo Sanchez, that's a good right-handed bat to put in the lineup.
I mean, they might not need Pete Alonso if they go get Pablo Sanchez.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Struggling today. But you know who's not going to struggle today, Flax? That's our man Jackson Scudder. So without further ado, let's move from topic number 1 over to Jackson's bullpen. Jackson, teach us some more about baseball.
All right, boys, for today's segment of Jackson's bullpen, with it being Hall of Fame time, I wanted to talk about something that's very passionate to me, and that is the Dave Stieb Hall of Fame case. For those of you who don't know, Dave Stieb pitched in the 1980s for the Blue Jays. Career 3.44 ERA, 56.5 B WAR. In the 1980s, had the second most innings pitched, 6th lowest ERA, minimum 1,500 pitches, 4th in WAR in the 1980s among pitchers. He received 7 Hall of Fame votes in 2004, 7 total votes in 2004. He has a higher career WAR than Whitey Ford, Sandy Koufax, and Red Ruffing, and he received 7 Hall of Fame votes. That is it, less than 1%. He was on the ballot 1 year, has never gotten to committee, has never been to any type of committee, received 7 votes. So I just wanted to...
Okay, well, now we know what our mission is.
Talk about Dave Stieb.
Jackson just comes in here for a minute and a half, drops a bomb, and that's it. That's crazy. He pitched 288 innings in 1982. 288 innings.
Here, listen.
I think guys would be scared if you told a guy at the beginning of the year he had to throw that many innings. I think guys would just say no. They just wouldn't pitch that year. No, I'm not even going to give it a try.
Flack, would you like to get more mad? From 1982 to 1984,
give
those
it to
3
me.
seasons, he led the AL in WAR. He led the AL in WAR among pitchers for 3 straight seasons. Never finished above 4th in Cy Young voting.
Now we have to look at the Cy Young voting.
So while you pull the Cy Young votes,
I've got it already. Give it to me. No, what were you going to say? I want to hear
All I was going to say is Stieb has more MLB The Show cards than every other comparison that Jackson put out.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, this is going bad today for me. But my point being is if that's the case, then obviously he should be in the Hall because we do Hall of Fame voting by MLB The Show cards.
So in 1982,
Exactly.
Dan Quisenberry finished 3rd in the Cy Young voting. He had an ERA plus of 159, one of the worst in a stretch of like 8 years for him. He was a reliever, had 35 saves that year, led the league, but pitching in 72 games as a reliever, 0 starts, he threw 136 innings. That was Dan Quisenberry.
Kansas City Royal?
The two, yes. That's
Yes.
great pull. The 2 other guys above him were Jim Palmer that year, who pitched through 15 wins, 3.13 ERA, 36 games, 32 starts. He pitched 4 times out of the bullpen. He threw 227 innings himself, led the league in whip and winning percentage, and that was about it. If you look at Stieb's, like what he led the league in across the board, he blew everyone out of the water in batters faced. Barely had a whip above Jim Palmer. Honestly, the more I look at this, Quisenberry should have won this Cy Young. It should have been a 1-2 between Quisenberry and Stieb. Pete Vukovich won it that year with 18 wins. 18-6 with a 3.34 ERA, 223 innings pitched. I mean, this is just crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. I'm glad you brought this to our attention because it might have just been something about the 80s baseball because that same year Dale Murphy won the MVP. The Hall of Fame looks very lowly upon the early 80s, apparently, of baseball.
We've already heard your Dale Murphy tangent, so very excited this week on Twitter to see what you have to say about Mr. Stieb.
It's coming.
Go ahead, Jackson. Finish.
Yeah, the last thing I wanted to say, 1983, go look at that Cy Young voting. It was worse. He led the AL in WAR among pitchers and was second in innings pitched, second in ERA, and received 0 Cy Young votes that year. Go show some love to Dave Stieb. That's all I wanted to bring to the table today.
I appreciate that. I think it's actually crazy that he got 5th in the Cy Young voting in, what year was this? In 1990. I actually think this was potentially less deserved. But at the same time, Roger Clemens lost to Bob Welch that year. Bob Welch put up a 2.9 WAR in 35 starts. Roger Clemens put up a 10.4 WAR. I don't know what to tell you because Clemens won how many Cy Youngs? 7? And the fact that it feels like he got cheated out of an 8th is crazy. I mean, good for Bob Welch. Roger Clemens had a 2.11 ERA plus in 1990. Wow. Jackson, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. I now have my mission for the entirety of the 2026 season. Make sure people know how egregious it is that Dave Stieb still is not a part of any contemporary ballots or any of the likes.
Yeah, I mean, for me it's simple. Like his Hall of Fame candidacy is questionable, but the fact that he got 7 votes for me, just he needs a little bit more love.
Almost 3,000 innings pitched. Here's the bigger issue, right? Not a high strikeout guy, not a power pitcher. He just doesn't fit that mold of the guys that we look at and say he either did one of 2 things for the Hall of Fame. He either accrued the stats or he accrued the accolades. And he doesn't have either one. But I agree with you. The fact that he was barely on there and then gone is really, really, really tough. I am curious what happened from 94 to 97. Because he just didn't play.
Oh, yeah.
And then he came back in 98 at 40 years old. He pitched in 19 games in 1998 at 40.
Yeah,
Jackson, actually, I have one for you. I have one for you, and I think our listeners are also going to love this. Did you know that in 2016, when the Cubs won the World Series, Joe Nathan received a World Series ring at 41 years old, pitched in 3 games for that Cubs team? I don't even know if a Cubs fan that watched that entire season could tell you that Joe Nathan pitched in 3 games that year. But there you go. Jackson's bullpen.
All right. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. We're happy to have Jackson on the pod more and more. But we do have one more topic for you guys today, and that is the Kansas City Royals came out, and they let us know as a baseball conglomerate, a group of people from the winter meetings, that they were looking for not 1 outfield bat, but 2 outfield bats, which tells us a little bit. 1, does this mean that Kyle Isbell is not the center fielder they want roaming that outfield for the future? And 2, we obviously already knew that they were going to have to replace MJ Melendez in some way, shape, or form, as over the last few years he has been their primary left fielder. Flax, there are a multitude of ways of which the Kansas City Royals can fill this outfield. A lot of really solid options on the trade market for guys who could play center field or a corner outfield spot for them. A couple solid free agents and some really good platoon options from an overall standpoint. Let's start with the guys they could trade for and go grab. And the one is a guy we've talked about all offseason already, who we know the Red Sox are shopping in Jarren Duran.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really, really highly skilled player. I think his defensive metrics that people will look at are really heavily skewed by the Green Monster in left field. It's a guy who has played a very successful center field at the big league level in a really tough ballpark in Fenway. That's a ton of ground to cover behind you. They, unfortunately have a Gold Glover. For Jarren Duran's sake, they have a Gold Glover who they keep trying to put at second base, who roams that center field grass. But Jarren Duran is a good left-handed bat who has swing and miss issues from time to time. But the level of speed that you could pair with him and Bobby Witt Jr. around a guy like a Vinny Pasquantino, around a Michael Garcia, around a Jack Caglione, it could wreak havoc for defenses. And that's the style of baseball that I think the Royals need to be playing, right? The kind of baseball where you grind out 2 to 3 extra runs a game using your ability to work the base paths. That's what teams like the Guardians have done to be successful in that division for a long time now. And there's no reason why the Royals can't be doing the same thing and play the same sort of ball. I think that Jarren Duran fits that style really well. He plays a hard-nosed game, plays very fiery. I think that locker room and that clubhouse would be really beneficial for him. Having leaders like a Salvador Perez would be immensely beneficial to his growth as a person and a player. And I think at this point, it might just be better for Jarren Duran to get himself out of Boston if he has the opportunity to be put in a trade, whether it's his choice or not. But I think when it's all said and done, you start looking at whether or not that truly benefits the Royals. I think him replacing MJ Melendez as the left fielder brings a lot more athleticism and brings probably a better bat-to-ball skill and a better power potential, at least as we've seen on a more consistent basis. When you start looking at that guy, I know, you've got another one out there on the list that I don't love as much, but it's still definitely an option.
Yeah, I mean, before we move too far here, I just want to make sure everybody knows that you could see more of the 2024 Jarren Duran in this stadium. He's not going to hit 21 home runs, but he could easily have 55 doubles in Kauffman. He could easily have 15. I mean, if he leads the league in triples in Kauffman, it just won't be all that surprising with how large those gaps are. So I think it's another reason why he fits so well with the Kansas City Royals. Joe Adell is the other name. I know you're up and down, hot and cold on Joe Adell. Barely walks, strikes out at a 26% rate, but he hit 37 home runs. This is another guy who can really cover ground in the outfield. He has a tremendous amount of athleticism, which would allow him to also, in my opinion, utilize those gaps in Kauffman. He'll be able to close them off, and he'll also be able to use them at the plate. Another guy who you could see go for 80-plus extra base hits, no problem in the stadium. I think what I'm actually just more than anything, especially after the season Joe Adell had, let's remember he had a 112 WRC plus, but 333 WOBA and a 362 XWOBA. I think the cost is actually probably similar for either of them, which would shock a lot of people because Duran's track record is a little bit better. But I think Adell could be another option for them to go after. Again, maybe the only problem is them matching up with the Los Angeles Angels from a prospect perspective. So we'll see what happens. Flax, I know I'm just struggling tonight across the board. I know.
You just said the angles?
Right angles. Right angles. Free agents wise, there was a name that was brought up today connected to the Kansas City Royals, and you were like a proud dad when you saw the name came up.
Well, I brought it up to you a month ago. I think Harrison Bader would be an unbelievably good fit for the Royals. I think at worst, he becomes a guy that you trade at the deadline to a contender if you're not one. It's what he's done. And at best, he's a guy who's played in the postseason in one of the toughest atmospheres and been successful in his career and could be that for you. He's super versatile across all three spots in the outfield. He takes good at-bats, can put together extra base hits. 2025, he had 277, 347, 449 in 146 games. 17 bombs, 11 stolen bases. Again, I said this to you earlier today. We have what feels like so many guys that are consistently putting up 2020 seasons that we don't think about how valuable it is to have a guy who can put up 15 home runs and 10 stolen bases. Especially a guy like a Harrison Bader who consistently gets overlooked as a player every offseason and signs a singular one-year deal. It's a guy that had a 122 WRC plus while matching that with 7 outs above average in the outfield. This would be a piece that accelerates your window if you're the Royals. I wouldn't even hate signing him to a 3-year deal. It doesn't have to be super expensive, and I think he absolutely has that in him. He fits well with the core of, again, Bobby Witt, Jack Caglione, Vinny Pasquantino, Maikel Garcia. You add a 5th guy in there, and then you've got some other role players, and all of a sudden the top 5 to 7 in your lineup becomes a tough one every single night for every starter and every pitching coach to game plan against. And I think Harrison Bader fits into that. It's not a ton of guys in this league that are hitting 277 and 17 bombs. It truly is an upper third guy in the league, especially when you start talking about versatile outfield.
Absolutely, right? I do think him and Tommy Pham have a handshake deal to only sign 1-year deals
It's
with teams
crazy
at the
to
current
me.
moment, but it's effective for both of them, and they're both certainly making their money.
With
Real quick,
upside teams so that they may get traded at the deadline.
absolutely. Keyword is may, after we saw what happened last year to Tommy Pham. Either way,
Well, yeah.
there is a couple platoon options. I'm going to give you some names here, Flax. Curious to how you would build this platoon out. From a strong side platoon perspective, a guy who was there last year after the deadline in Mike Yastrzemski. He had a 126 WRC plus versus righties last year. Another option at strong side platoon, which would be another reunion for the Kansas City Royals, was Ryan O'Hearn, who had a great year last year. He had a 125 WRC plus versus righties. And then from a weak side platoon perspective, maybe and arguably over the last 4 years, the best weak side platoon in all of baseball, not that anybody wants to pay attention to this, is Rob Refschneider. 159 WRC plus last year versus versus lefties. He had a WOBA of over 400 against lefties. I mean, he's an MVP versus lefties from a bat perspective, as crazy as that sounds. And then, of course, Austin Hayes, a 155 WRC plus quietly versus lefties last year. Flax, if you have the opportunity to build a platoon to replace a guy like MJ Melendez in left, what does that look like?
I think if everyone is willing to sign for the price that they're worth, I think I probably put together Yastrzemski and Refschneider. O'Hearn in this ballpark does not have good memories. He's never hit well here. I think that I pass on even going forward with that request towards him and let him go sign elsewhere. More than likely, Ryan O'Hearn's getting a 3+ year deal. He's played well enough the last 2 years to get it. I'm probably not spending that on a platoon bat, more than likely. Someone's going to put him at first base, corner, outfield, DH every single day and let him get at bats against righties and lefties because he's proven that he is pretty adequate against lefties. I'm probably going Mike Yastrzemski and Rob Refschneider. Again, the reason I say, I caveat this with, if they're willing to take my deal, is because I'm pretty certain that Rob Refschneider is going to end up back at Fenway Park. I just think he'd rather play there. He knows what his job is. He knows how many at-bats he's going to get. He's really comfortable in that dugout with that staff.
At doing it.
And he's been very successful in that ballpark doing it. If it works, why change it? He may even take a lesser deal to do that. The other reason I would go Refschneider if I could is because Austin Hayes hasn't necessarily been the healthiest since he came up with Baltimore. It's been very trying. But when he is healthy, he's really beneficial to any lineup he's in, which is why he continues to get contracts. So again, I think I still probably build this out as Yastrzemski on the left side, Refschneider on the right side. I think that builds you out a pretty strong right or left fielder when it's all said and done. Kaggs is probably going to be your everyday right fielder. Good defenders, versatile defenders that work on their side of the play.
Yeah, I completely agree, right? I think Hayes is a great option due to the fact that if you're only going to ask him to play against lefties, it potentially helps him stay healthy at the end of the day. I think it is a way, and frankly, if I was Austin Hayes' agent, that's how I'd be pitching Austin Hayes at the current moment in order to also find a way to keep my guy on the field and potentially improve his opportunity, even if it's 1-year deals moving forward for the rest of his career, right? Austin Hayes is looking to get to the golden number like everybody is, 10 years of Major League service. This is a way of which he could find to do that. So hopefully that happens for him, but at the end of the day, I think Yastrzemski, Refschneider is probably the ideal combo for Kansas City as well. Flax, let's do a little speed round here. And that's the fact that the one other thing we thought Kansas City could use was potentially a utility man. I tend to agree with you. There's a couple guys that I like for this. However, it's hard to make something necessarily work from a trade perspective. What we have talked about with Kansas City is if they were going to trade for utility man, you probably move one of the 4 catchers in your system because that is where you are deepest. And the number 1 prospect on your team is a catcher who came up last year and raked in Carter Jensen. So you have a little bit more of an ability to move the other 3. But there's a lot of free agents right now who are very solid utility men with track records of being able to do it. A couple names: Willie Castro, Tyro Estrada, Ramon Urias, an old friend of yours,
Yes.
Dylan Moore, Orlando Arcia. Give me one of those guys that you think would fit on this roster.
I love Willie Castro. We've talked about Willie Castro a ton. I think one of his downsides to his opportunity is that he can play everywhere. It's really hard for him to find flow when he is in a different spot in the order and a different position on the field every single night. And that's a lot of what was happening to him in Minnesota. I think if you can get him to a place where he has a very certain role, maybe he's playing second base every day if Michael Massey isn't playing well. Maybe he and Michael Massey are working off each other. Maybe he's playing a fill-in role, but really only in a couple of spots, right? He's giving Cags time off in right field. He's giving Michael Garcia days off at third base, and he's slotting in at second. I think Willie Castro has a ton of upside potential that would be a worthwhile signing, even if it's a 1+1 deal with a lot of future opportunity, and maybe even make it a club option to give yourself the protection as the Royals if he continues to play the way he's been playing. But that's probably number one on the list for me.
Yeah, I'm going to go with one of Justin Aguilar's boys. Shout out to our homie, Dylan Moore. I mean, this is a guy who's been a pure utility man at the major league level. He's shown that he can do it. He's a guy who covers a ton of ground defensively and would fit well in Kauffman regardless of where they needed him to play. Plus his scrappiness and his speed, again, going to help him produce potentially a little bit more offensively than maybe other ballparks would allow him to do. So I love that fit. At the end of the day, Willie Castro, switch hitter, if I remember correctly, unless I'm going crazy, makes a lot of sense. That's the type of guy you want to see in the utility slot. Final thoughts this week, Flax. I'm going to do the easy one. I'm going to take the cop out. MLB Draft Lottery is happening today, the day that we release the podcast. If you're listening on release day, December 9th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure to tune in, find out who gets the number one overall pick. My team can't get it, so Flax, I'm rooting for you.
That'd be sick, but I don't have high hopes. Anything in the top 6, I think I'm happy with. I just don't want 10. After last year, I just don't want 10. I think 6 or better would be beneficial to the Orioles. My final thought is this. I don't want a signing period in the offseason for the MLB. I like that it's slow. Listen, you can't go to a really fancy restaurant every single night for dinner. Sometimes you get to go once in a while, and that's a passing bomb. And that's what you get being a fan of the MLB. But if you can't enjoy the takeout meals of Mike Soroka signing a 1-year deal on a Monday morning, then you don't deserve the Juan Sotos and the Shohei Ohtanis and this year's Kyle Tuckers. Let it happen. Let it come to you, and just embrace baseball for what we yearn for in the offseason.
I love it. I mean, you can't have your cake and eat it too, as they like to say.
There it is.
So maybe that's where we go with this. But as always, guys, we hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to share it with your friends. Like, follow, subscribe across all of our socials, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Flax is on a new one lately, posting another walk-off home run every single day on TikTok. I don't know, join in, have fun, share it with your friends. But at the end of the day, the winter meeting's going on right now. Make sure you guys pay attention. MLB Tonight is at the winter meetings throughout this week. Worthwhile watching. But as always, have a great week.